This is the most significant reverse in American foreign policy that we have seen.
This 33-page document is too serious a piece of work to just dismiss it with the hoary old cliches about, as you say, America being our closest ally, blah, 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 blah. And the most chilling bit as well is that previously far-right tropes and ideas now find themselves not just at the centre, but with the imprimatur of the president.
This document needs serious attention. I just don't feel it's getting it right now. It's Jon.
It's Lewis.
And as we talk, the door is opening and closing at number 10 Downing Street, with Keir Starmer welcoming Zelenskyy, Macron and others for the latest round of talks on what is going to happen in Ukraine and whether there is a peace deal that everyone finds acceptable. I frankly find it difficult to believe. I also find it difficult to believe that the problem that Donald Trump was having last night was that Zelenskyy hadn't read the proposals. I wonder whether Donald Trump had read the detail of the proposals, but apparently his negotiators love it, according to Donald Trump, and Russia is happy with it too. But I think that, look, we'll see what happens there, and we'll keep bringing you the kind of latest on that and whether there is a peace deal. But it is this document that I think should be our focus of attention, which is, it came out at the end of last week. And I saw something about it somewhere over the weekend. I hadn't heard anything on any of the mainstream bulletins about it. And I thought, what is this thing? I read it and could not believe what it contained.
No, indeed. This is the US National Security Strategy. It's a document which comes out from time to time from different administrations. And the idea of it is really to kind of bind and bring coherence to security, defence, foreign policy of a particular administration, to give a sort of articulation of the president's worldview. And obviously we've had glimmers of that over the course of this first year of the second Trump presidency. But this brings it together in the most extraordinary way, and I think crystallises the shift that actually, Jon, we've been talking about on this show on and off all year, perhaps best crystallised apart from this by that extraordinary speech that J.D. Vance made at the start of the year as the incoming vice president at the Munich Security Conference, where he basically berated Europe and European governments for losing themselves, losing their sense of European civilization. This is that writ large in this document. It says, among other things, that the president and the administration blames the EU and migration for what they say is the imminent, total cultural unravelling in Europe. It says that Europe does have economic problems, but they are, quotes, eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of, as you say, Jon, civilisational erasure within the next 20 years. They say that the larger issues facing Europe and the EU are that the EU and other transnational bodies undermine European political liberty, sovereignty, migration policies, transforming the continent, creating strife, censorship of free speech, suppression of political opposition, cratering birth rates, loss of national identities and self-confidence. It says that the US still needs Europe, but it is not confident that Europe will continue to exist in the way that America has recognised it hitherto.
Well, without being boring, let me read a tiny bit more of this document, because I think it is so profoundly telling, which it says American diplomacy should continue to stand up for genuine democracy, freedom of expression and unapologetic celebrations of Europeans' nations' individual character and history. And then it goes on. America encourages its political allies in Europe to promote this revival of spirit, and the growing influence of patriotic European parties indeed gives cause for great optimism. Hang on, when you say patriotic parties, talking about the Labour or Conservative Party? No, I don't think so. I think you're talking about reform. Are you talking about the Socialist Party or the Centre-Right Party in France? No, I think you're talking about the Rassemblement National. Are you talking about the SPD in Germany or the Christian Democrats? No, you're talking about Alternative für Deutschland. And this is incredible that you have a US authored document, not just a kind of an ad hominem remarks.
It's not Steve
by
Bannon
Donald Trump.
wanging on
Steve Bannon.
podcast.
This is the official view of American foreign policy and national security as it pertains to Europe right now. And this is coming out of the White House with an introduction from Donald Trump blessing this document. This is their thinking now. They want to see the far-right parties of Europe taking power because that is the way they see as the route to averting civilisational erasure, as they put it. And on NATO as well, it carries on in a very similar vein, questioning whether, in a few decades at the latest, certain NATO members will become majority non-European. As such, it's an open question whether they will view their place in the world or their alliances with the United States in the same way as those who signed the NATO Charter. And so it then says, what the policies should be for changing Europe. And in that context of the threat to NATO and becoming majority non-European, the document talks about our goal should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. What does that mean?
I mean, that's the most chilling bit. And the most chilling bit as well is that previously far-right tropes and ideas, which had been confined, again, a theme of this year on the show, been confined once to the fringes of politics, now find themselves not just at the centre, but with the imprimatur of the president, the seal of the president on it. Specifically, and this adverts to the civilisational erasure bit, the Great Replacement theory. Basically, what the White House is saying, something that, Tommy Robinson and others, have long been arguing, is that, basically immigrants, specifically Muslims, are coming to Europe to erase the native population, to convert these societies to Islam. The document doesn't explicitly say this, but this is the theory that it's clearly echoing. And therefore, the Europe as we've known it, European civilization, will be, if not erased, then significantly undermined. And as I say, this is a fevered theory. It's a conspiracy theory. It's one that's frequently and regularly been disproven and for which there is no evidence. And yet, it now finds itself at the heart of the White House's thinking. And indeed, not only in its analysis, but as you say, John, in its prescription. It's basically saying that in order to guarantee long-term American security interests and to keep the European-American alliance, the North American alliance, on the road, the White House and American policy should be to help the forces internally within these countries who are opposing this replacement, opposing this erasure, and assist them in as part of America's foreign policy. It's gobsmacking.
Well, look, we did an episode, I remember, a few months ago when Suella Braverman had been in Washington and made a sort of similar kind of speech about the potential takeover of Britain and becoming a non-British state, as it were, because of the influx of Muslims. And you think, well, hang on, I think the population, I think I'm right in saying it's 6% of the UK population is Muslim. That's a pretty big stretch to say it's going to become a majority Muslim nation under Sharia law. So what I thought when I read this document, it is very, very long on assertion and very, very short on any facts to back those assertions up, because you're just saying stuff out there that you can't possibly kind of sustain the argument for.
But who do we see? I mean, these ideas found an audience, and therefore, as a result of who he is, an even greater audience over the course of the weekend via Elon Musk, who was approvingly tweeting out the relevant bits that we were just talking about. And he had a particular reason to.
Of course.
Because, and this is where kind of, these big abstract theories and these big geopolitical civilizational theories kind of intersect with American, very contemporary, right here, right now, American commercial technological interests. Because over the course of the weekend, we basically saw rising tension between the US and the EU in particular, after the EU imposed a $140 million fine against Elon Musk's X for breaching the EU Digital Services Act. And this has triggered a war of words between the White House and the federal government and the EU. The US's ambassador to the EU saying the EU is guilty of regulatory overreach targeting American innovation. And the EU, which is meeting today, EU Council is meeting today, basically sort of, and the EU Commission, trying to work out a response to the fact that, we talked again all year, sort of almost feels a bit retrospective this, about the relationship between Musk and Trump. And obviously that's had its up and downs. But once again, they find themselves at one on this, seeing the EU as an enemy, in this case, not just against kind of their vision of Western civilization, but against American technological prowess, because the EU is pretty much the only regulatory bloc in the world, certainly in the West, outside sort of, superpower like China and so on, which is acting in a serious regulatory way against American AI and American tech and so on.
If you look at the history of American foreign policy, from the Second World War to more or less today, you've seen that there are differences in foreign policy between, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, or Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, or, go back further to Kennedy and, Nixon, or whoever, whatever it happens to be. but it has always been within sort of 5 degrees in one direction, 5 degrees in another. What about the Vietnam War? What is the threat from the Soviet Union? Those sort of differences. But there's been a fundamental solidity in terms of belief in the NATO alliance, believing in the rules of the road that have ensured America has become the preeminent superpower since the Second World War, that have favoured them on trade. This is the most significant reverse in American foreign policy that we have seen, not just in my generation, but in previous generations as well. And Donald Trump is ripping up the rules of the road by saying there's a Western Hemisphere, which broadly speaking, we, America, will have dominance over, and you'll do what we like. And the rest of the world, well, we don't really care what happens there. We're not there to promote democracy. We're not there to promote freedom of speech. If people want to run dictatorships, if people want to be kind of brutal oligarchs, that's up to them. But it's no concern of the United States of America.
Well, John, I think it's a sort of weird inversion of that in a way, which, I mean, that's all completely right. But I think we in Europe now find ourselves in a very peculiar position, which is the reason this feels different, is that for all of the ups and downs of different American presidents and different bits of foreign policy and different emphases and so on, the fundamental after the war was certainly that Western Europe, at least, and the US were aligned. We had a common enemy. I think what this document reminds us, and Vance was sort of articulating that there is a sort of line of continuity between the American thinking during the Cold War and now. All administrations of every colour after the war saw basically what was going on in the world as a civilisational struggle. In that case, between Soviet communism on the one hand and Western liberalism and democracy on the other. Obviously, we knew which side we were on in that case. The weird thing is that the US under this administration, and potentially under Republican parties in the future, see us as on a different side of a civilisational struggle. What I mean about that is that, in a way, Trump's thinking, talking about civilizational erasure, it's not new. It's sort of a revival of Cold War thinking. Back then it was US versus communism. Now it's MAGA versus liberalism, versus MAGA versus cosmopolitanism, versus internationalism, versus globalism. And the forces of MAGA see us, or at least, the sort of centre-right, centre-left governments of Europe, as being on a different side, civilizationally speaking, to them. And that is why we had the extraordinary reaction this weekend of who welcomed this document. It wasn't Western governments, it wasn't the British government, the French government, German government. It was the Russian government. It was Moscow saying that this document basically expands upon and supports much of their worldview. That's what's weird. That's what's disturbing. And that's been, among all the froth, day to day of news and week to week. To me, 2025, that's been one of the pivot points that really matters.
Oh, completely. And this is why look, the co-president of the European Union, Antonio Costa, has come out and kind of said, you know what, mind your own business. Europe is strong and powerful and it can go its own way. We're saying we just can't accept the threats that are being made from outside to Europe over how we should be governed and govern ourselves. And, rightly so, Europe is full of independent nations. And the idea that America is singling Europe out as the problem, but aligning itself seemingly with Moscow, and Moscow coming out and saying, yeah, loving what's in this new document. And again, it's the world turned upside down. I'm pleased that the co-president of the EU said that, because what's also been really striking to me, Lewis, is that how little attention this document is getting. Both in terms of the British government hasn't really said much about it, because we all know that nobody wants to pick a fight with Donald Trump. But when I hear the recitation of, America is our closest ally and we are forever intertwined, our destinies are intertwined, la, 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 la. You read this document and think, no, it's not. You've got to get with the thinking here. America is not where it was. And I think it's absolute false comfort. And I'm amazed at how little coverage it's frankly had on the BBC. Maybe there are reasons for that, given the sort of uncertainties in the corporation after the resignation of the Director General over that spat with Donald Trump. But just amazed how little coverage it's had generally.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know whether it's because we've kind of got a bit used to it. I don't know whether it's because we don't take it seriously. I think there's a bit of use, like you say, John. It's almost too horrible to contemplate. It almost seems incredible. But I think that is, again, one of the big problems over the course of the year, is not listening to what Donald Trump tells us. And I think it's very easy to dismiss Trump when, he just says things off the cuff, or he says things which he sort of forgets, and he, makes impromptu funny comments or whatever it happens to be. But this is of a different order of magnitude for two reasons. One, as we've been saying, all of the themes of this build on things that have been said, things that have been done, actual policy over the course of this administration so far. And it is simply, this 33-page document is too serious a piece of work, too serious and credible an articulation of their thinking to just dismiss it with the hoary old cliches about, as you say, America being our closest ally, blah, 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 blah. I think it's time to we need to wake up. It's something that we've been talking about all year, and yet it never quite seems to happen. Or at least, certainly, it doesn't permeate the sort of outer membrane of certainly what British governments and British ministers talk about.
So we talk about the Overton window moving and, what Trump is doing in terms of promoting kind of far-right parties in Europe. There is some stuff he is saying now about what's happening in America, which, for example, Nigel Farage would never be allowed to get away with in Britain. You cannot imagine him saying, right, we'd be better off without the Pakistani community, or the Bangladeshi community should go home. Listen to Donald Trump talking about Minneapolis and one Minneapolis congresswoman, Ilhan Omar.
They have a representative, Ilhan Omar, who they say married her brother. It's a fraud. She tries to deny it now, but you can't really deny it because, it just happened. She shouldn't be allowed to be a congresswoman, and I'm sure people are looking at that. And she should be thrown the hell out of our country. And most of those people, they have destroyed Minnesota, okay? Minnesota, you have an incompetent governor. You have a crooked governor. He's crooked as hell, but he's incompetent. Walz he should be ashamed. That beautiful land, that beautiful state. And all they do is complain, complain, complain. You have her. She's always talking about the Constitution provides me with... Go back to your own country and figure out your Constitution. All she does is complain about this country, and without this country, she would not be in very good shape. She probably wouldn't be alive right now. So Somalia is considered by many to be the worst country on earth. I don't know. I haven't been there. I won't be there anytime soon, I hope. But what Somalia, what the Somalian people have done to Minnesota is not even believable. It's not even believable. And a lot of it starts with the governor.
Yeah, so...
Just to be clear, Ilhan Omar did not marry her brother. That is a far-right conspiracy theory that was propagated as far back as 2018, but the president is re-articulating.
And just to be clear, that Ilhan Omar is a US passport holder. They're in the United States of America, fully legitimately, and elected to Congress fully legitimately. And Donald Trump is saying, go back to your own country. So this language, and so when he talks about Europe and civilisational erasure, he doesn't say, oh, you've got to get rid of all the dark-coloured people from your country. But you can see that is what it means.
And again, talking about the Overton window, I mentioned Elon Musk earlier. Over the course of the weekend, he's been tweeting out that Europeans are facing a genocide as a result of migration. He's compared the EU to Nazi Germany, called for it to be abolished. Again, something that's been supported by Moscow. And this is the world we're in. This is 2025, right? This is 2025. These kind of crazy, outlandish stuff, finds itself at the heart of our political discourse.
And being normalised.
Completely normalised. I mean, like that, I watched that the other day when it came out. And again, barely caused a ripple over here. Even within the US, there was coverage, and it was a sense that this is sort of 10% more, 15% more than where Trump has gone before, but only 10%, right? And we are the frog in the boiling water. And the thing that I find, this is all quite normal, or has become normal, or normalised if it's not normal. But the thing, John, that I think from this document and all of this stuff that I find most worrying is the sense of kind of almost the sort of imperialism of MAGA now. It's funny, like MAGA started as a kind of quite, clearly nationalist, and it had relatively narrow aims. It was about kind of America first. It was about restoring a sense of kind of older American political order internally within the US. Again, this all reminds me a bit of the Cold War now. This idea of a civilisational fight that MAGA and Trump and those around Trump, even more pertinently, kind of see themselves as the kind of directors and the the kind of benefactors of similarly minded movements around the world. Just as Moscow used to see itself with communist parties in the Cold War, and likewise the US saw itself with anti-communist forces in different parts of the world, almost fighting like proxy wars around the world. That's what it kind of reminds me of. It reminds me of those arguments that they had in the Soviet Union, which is, can you have socialism in one country, or do you need to fight a global battle? And it feels to me almost that MAGA has moved, starting from a kind of purely national project to increasingly thinking, no, for America to survive civilizationally, other parts of the West have to survive, quotes, civilizationally, and we're going to help them do so. And that, to me, I think is quite a disturbing development.
There was a critique of Britain in the early 1960s from a US Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, which was that Britain has lost an empire and not yet found a role. It feels like the irony under Donald Trump is that, it's America first. We're pulling up the drawbridge. We don't care what happens in other countries. Yes, you do. You're looking for imperial expansion into Europe, and that is why you're promoting these pro-patriotic parties that are on the far right of our politics. And you are saying you will kind of intervene. We'll have to consider how we can make sure our view pertains in Europe. Sorry, that is imperialism. That is spreading the word of MAGA to the continent of Europe and making sure that Europe bends the knee. This document needs serious attention. I just don't feel it's getting it right now.
Right. After this, we'll be turning our attention to domestic politics and Keir Starmer, who's had another quite difficult weekend, with the news in particular that some of his closest allies appear to be thinking about who might replace him. Stay with us.
Talking about jobs for young people, a lot of speculation about your job this weekend. How unsettling is it?
Well, look, I'm absolutely focused on what I need to do to lead the country, and that's why today my focus is on announcing 50,000 extra apprentices. These are for young people.
Are your chances of leading the country diminishing?
No, we're introducing these apprentices today. I'm really pleased to be able to talk about that.
So that's the Prime Minister on a visit, as you heard, talking about apprenticeships. Very keen to talk about apprenticeships, not keen to talk about this extraordinary story which that journalist wanted to talk about, which appeared in the Times over the last couple of days by Patrick Maguire, which is about leadership speculation, which isn't so unusual because it's become commonplace in Westminster, especially over the last 6 months. Lots and lots of plotting going on about replacing Keir Starmer either before or shortly after the May elections next year. But what's unusual about this and what's potentially disturbing for Starmer about this is that this latest twist is that the people behind this one are Labour Together. Labour Together is basically the kind of think tank campaigning organisation set up by Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who's basically been the kind of phalanx behind Starmer, his main sort of supporters within the party, the vehicle through which Starmer does his bidding. Anyway, this think tank, as I say, used to be run by McSweeney, has basically sent a survey to local Labour parties, seen by the Times, prompting members to name the politicians who, quote, stand the best chance of leading Labour to electoral victory at the next general election, compared with Starmer, 8 politicians named, including Wes Streeting, Shabana Mahmood, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, and Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Prime Minister.
This is extraordinary, isn't it? Because on one hand, you could say, well, it's just a think tank saying, well, who do you think would stand the best chance with at the next election? So nothing to see here. Hang on a minute. This is Labour Together. This isn't some fringe group. This is the think tank that propelled Keir Starmer to the leadership with Morgan McSweeney. Now, I'm not suggesting there is any kind of hidden hand here that McSweeney knew that Labour Together were doing this. But it does have that feel of, my God, if Labour Together are doing this and putting out a survey, calling into question Keir Starmer's leadership and touting who would be a better replacement than him, then it shows that it's not just on the extremes and the malcontents of Labour politics that are wondering about who the next leader should be. It is right in the centre of the party.
No, indeed. And if you actually look at the kind of the people involved in Labour Together, as they were set up by McSweeney, but now it's run by Alison Phillips, who used to be editor of the Mirror. But it's a kind of suite, really, of kind of Labour grandees, past and present. Sally Morgan, who used to work for Tony Blair, Alan Miliband, who used to work for Blair. This is a kind of this is the kind of men in grey suits of the Labour Party, men and women in grey suits of the Labour Party, who are clearly thinking about a potential contest to come. And one of the things that's really happened over the course of this year, and especially in the last 6 months, that I've been so struck by, is the extent to which the conversation about Starmer's leadership has become so normalised, almost to the point that it's a given that there will be a challenge and that he might be gone in short order. I interviewed Barry Gardner, the Labour sort of veteran MP, on my LBC Sunday show this weekend, and that wasn't the only extraordinary kind of backbench intervention over the course of the weekend. There's another, long-standing MP, Carl Turner, MP for Kingston upon Hull East. He had criticised David Lammy's jury plans, which you asked about him about last week, and he came out so fiercely against it. And he said quite openly in an interview at the weekend that he wouldn't have spoken out against such a senior minister in the past, but he felt he was left with little alternative in the past week, and basically said as well that there was very little discipline within the Parliamentary Labour Party, or really any listening to the Chief Whip or the Prime Minister. He said, I've got no axe to grind, but we're in a situation whereby it appears if the government is governing by the consent of the PLP. The Tories did that for a bit. It didn't get them very far. I mean, that is a sort of senior Labour politician basically saying that Number 10 has kind of given up on trying to corral or trying to execute its will with its own MPs, and is basically just doing what they're told, which is the opposite way around of normally how it works.
I was talking to someone who's close to the leadership and of the Labour Party, and he was saying that, look, ultimately, he thinks that this talk of getting rid of Starmer is so damaging because he thinks it's going to go nowhere. Not because Starmer is brilliant and should stay, but if Starmer doesn't want to go of his own volition, it's very difficult to get him out. You'd need 80 names. They'd need to be signed publicly. It would be a very tall order to do it. So the party is damaging itself while not actually probably ever going to do what it's necessary.
Willing to wound but not kill.
Willing to wound but not kill. And that leaves the party in the worst of all worlds. Because Starmer is saying, I'm not going anywhere. And Rachel Reeves is going, I'm not going anywhere. And so, right, are you bold enough? Are you going to make my day? Are you big enough? And honestly, I doubt that the party will do that. And so it limps on unhappily in a marriage with its leader that it wishes it could end but doesn't quite know how.
Yeah, I do think Starmer's survival is being underpriced at the moment, because for the reasons you identified, John, which is structural. The Parliamentary Labour Party, if it can see an excuse to duck something, it will do it. Also, there's still, if an election were more imminent, I think that there would be more energy, but an election is still sort of far away. There's enough time to be able to sort of kick the can down the road a bit. And there is a sense that, and I think as well, MPs will want to work out exactly kind of, they'll have a close eye on what's going on with reform. And the fact that, as we've talked about before, this could have been the year of sort of almost irrecoverable breakthrough for reform. If they got to 35 points or whatever, but they haven't done that. And they've been making a series of errors and misjudgments. And it would only take in the new year, 3 or 4 points to come off the reform rating before, suddenly everything looks a lot more kind of in the game and in contention. And you can completely imagine a world where, look, it could be absolutely catastrophic in May. It probably will be catastrophic in May. But that is now so priced in that actually even a sort of slightly better performance, slightly more credible performance for Labour, you can imagine Starmer being able to say, well, look, it wasn't as bad as we thought. Everyone just needs to calm down a little bit and sort of, batten down the hatches. So I think that is underpriced. I think the only sort of caveat to that is I think Labour MPs are, there's two things. The first is that, Starmer, unusually for a Prime Minister with his majority, he has so little authority compared to Blair or a Thatcher or a Johnson, because no Labour MP has ever really believed that they got their seat because of him. If you're Blair or you're Thatcher or you're Johnson after their landslide, you can literally turn around, and the Chief Whip can turn around to the MPs and go, hey, you're only here because of the fella in number 10, right? Or the woman in number 10. You owe them. There's never been that sense with Starmer. His coattails barely reach his toes, right? So that has always been a sort of problem for him. And if there is a sense that Starmer is damaging the party brand irreparably, then you could imagine Labour MPs deciding to move. And that is the conversation they've been having.
Well, in a moment, we'll be back and exploring the new communications avenue that Keir Starmer is going down.
TikTok, follow me.
So that is Keir Starmer, the new communications avenue being this thing called TikTok. I don't think it will ever take off. But anyway, Keir Starmer has launched his own account on TikTok, and if you heard at the top there, he said, "Oh, I'd like you to follow me," and it looked like Keir Starmer was doing a rather poor audition for a part in Love Actually.
He's currently taking the app by storm. He's got fewer than 2,000 followers at the time of recording. Might get up to 3,000 by the end of the day, Keir. Keep going, mate. It's quite weird as well, considering that it is actually banned on government devices.
Well,
TikTok.
so okay, I've got to tell you
Completely
something.
ideal.
I've got to tell you something I was told about this, because I was hearing that Keir Starmer was going to go onto TikTok from someone who, close to the central government.
We're all still waiting for your arrival on the platform, John.
Exactly. So what happened was that they've got a phone that has got TikTok loaded on it in the Cabinet Office. One phone, which is kept in this sort of lead-lined drawer under lock and key, that is brought out when the government feels it needs to have to put something on TikTok. Now, I don't know whether...
Next to the big red button,
I don't know, exactly. I don't know whether that has changed. But I'm going to say, if that is the method by which Keir Starmer is going to communicate on TikTok, it's not going to feel ever so spontaneous. Has anyone found the key? Do you know where anyone has put the key for the drawer where we keep the phone, which has got... Oh, it's not charged. Oh, bugger, we won't be able to put a TikTok up anyway.
I've got to get onto Snapchat as quickly as possible. Snap my chat. Number 10 source says we're finding new ways to share our vision of national renewal wherever people are. That'll do well on the algorithm, won't it? I always find messages of national renewal just spread like wildfire. Very good stuff.
He could be the hottest thing since Angry Ginger, whatever his name
When
was.
you next on Blue Sky, by the way, talking about social media.
Don't you
They're
start.
still waiting.
Honestly, don't you start. I've got enough with Guido Fawkes going on about it. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.